Hello, my lovelies. We are taking a little mini break from me being lost in different dimensions, trying to go home while looking for Festus and talking about books, to have the channel's first shareholders meeting, starting with the state of a lot of the books that I am currently writing. As you all know, I don't just do book reviews. I am an actual author. And via that fact, I have been working on several fantasy books, which does take a while. So, for this first shareholders meeting, let's discuss the books I have in production, the books I have on hold, and other things I have up and coming in the bookish world.
Alright, my lovelies, let's talk about the books that have been put on a temporary back burner with Goblin's Labyrinth. Goblin's Labyrinth is a story I am very still excited to finish. Unfortunately, I hit a bit of the writer's block with that story for single scene. That is happening before I get into the hardcore, nitty-gritty, exciting stuff in the story. To give you all a little refresher, Goblin's Labyrinth is my story about a young woman who got pregnant by her useless boyfriend, who tricks her into going to Montana with him, and then he abandons her in a cabin that is tearing apart. She survives via the kindness of a strange man she meets in the woods and some very helpful goblins and trolls who let her know that she has to make a decision that will dramatically affect their world. What that decision is and why she's gotta be the one to make it, I am not telling you, but it will involve her eventually ending up in a labyrinth with all kinds of freaky monsters. I do plan to continue giving more peeks into that story when I'm actually back to writing that story, but sadly that story has been temporarily tabled due to the fact that my muse refuses to tell me what happens next. The next tabled story I wish to discuss with all of you is my story, Game of Cards. Actually, that is incorrect. Game of Cards is the name of the series. The first story in that series is Shuffling the Deck, which is the story of a young woman who was captured in a war, who falls in love with a nobleman, and he wishes to marry her, but rich nobleman, poor chick, that doesn't work out with the higher ups, aka parents and other nobles. But this guy has a lot of sway. I'm not going to tell you why he has sway, but he's got a lot of sway to force the marriage. So those who really don't want this marriage to happen kidnap the young woman, and she almost unalives via monster. Now, I would tell you more, my lovelies, but this is the part where I have to halt this story. But this story is, unlike a lot of tabled stories, about to get serious back in production, and I will be giving updates about it. Next tabled story is the second entry in my Realms series. Now, I left Realms the Hidden Fairy, as I do with many of my stories, on a very interesting cliffhanger. Realms the Hidden Fairy, for those of you who don't know, is about a young woman named Willow whose parents went missing many years ago, and she grew up with her aunt. Her aunt attempts to tell her what happened to her parents, but every time her aunt tries to, she's hit with this overwhelming fear that makes it so she can't even say anything. Willow has just turned 18, she's about to go to college, and she's at that phase of her life, everything's about to change because she's entered adulthood, well, early adulthood. So she wants to solve the mystery of what happened to her parents, and one day when she is taking a break, trying to clear her head in a park late at night, she stumbles across a fairy and a troll in a life or death battle, which not only starts to open up some mysteries about her past, but send her on a new journey. This particular story is one I'm really excited about, and I do plan to get back to writing part 2 in the Realm series, but I am excited to get back to the second entry of that series pretty soon. I do see it might be available during 2027, but I'm not going to promise that via the fact that it is still in early production. The last story that was temporarily tabled is the second story in my Violet Evergreen series, Violet Evergreen in the Rebel Spirit. This story picks up right where I left off at Violet Evergreen in the Seeds of Rebellion. I have actually made quite a bit of headway in this story. The only reason why this story got tabled was because of another story I'm working on that I'll tell you more about in a second, called True Love for Christmas. True Love for Christmas, I was hoping to get that out in 2025, and in my haste to do so, I ended up tabling Violet's second entry, and Violet Evergreen in the Seeds of Rebellion was the second book I ever published, so I expected the Rebel Spirit to be published a lot sooner. Unfortunately, that book keeps getting pushed back for other projects, but I am going to this summer reopen full focus on Violet Evergreen, the Rebel Spirit. You guys will be hearing more about it, seeing some more snippets about it, and getting to see more about Violet's journey and her world as she tries to gain her freedom from her cruel guardians. So that, my lovelies, is all the stories that got tabled for now, and some that I'm getting ready to restart production on with them. Next up are the stories I feel very confident will either come out in 2026 or 2027. Starting off, I am going to mention my story, The Arrangement. Now, The Arrangement is about a young woman who from birth was unwanted. Her family considered her a jinx. They sent her away for somebody else to raise her. That person didn't really raise her. They just took the family's money and put the poor girl in shed. As an adult, one day they realized they need her to marry this rich guy from another prominent family so they can get a business deal. So they promise her some money in exchange for marrying this dude. She does that, but the only little problem is that she is pregnant by her boyfriend, who just ditched her because she is pregnant. Yeah. Definitely a real winner, that guy. Anyway, so the man she ends up marrying just for this whole family arrangement wants to make another deal with her. First off, neither one of them really wanted this marriage, and they don't really expect anything romantically from each other. The guy actually had a girlfriend going into the marriage, a girlfriend who was really pissed off he married somebody else for the sake of his family's demands. But either way, the two of them decide to come up with a deal. She helps him with his plan to get a high position in his family business, and he will help her with things she needs to not only get her own research started, but to be able to provide a very comfortable life for her and her baby. So they are going to have their own zany mission, twists and twirls. Well, twists and tails and all that stuff. But this story is a story I plan to have be my first kinda short story. It'll probably count as a just shorter book anyway. I do plan for that book to come out late 2026. The next story that I surmise will come out in either 2026 or 2027 is my story, Marriage is Complicated. Now, Marriage is Complicated is an interesting story. It's about these two couples. Okay, you have two people, a man and a woman, whose parents are a part of the mob. These are two different mafias that work together, and they decide that the heads of those mobs decide that their kids should get married to, solidify some kind of agreement. On the other side, you have two big business people who have decided that their kids need to get married for the sake of, some type of business agreement. The kids from whose parents are mafia people don't want to get married. They grow up together, yes, they get along, yes, but they see each other more like their sibling. They've been there for each other their whole lives, but there is no romantic idea. It's just they feel like, this is more my brother, my sister. That's kind of creeping me out that these people want them to get married. And on the other end of the spectrum, the two people getting married do not know each other. They don't hate each other, but they're not really into each other. And they are being peer pressured by their families to get married. They both try to fight it, and I'm not going to tell you how their parents nudged them into it, but their fight to not get married failed spectacularly. Now, the real kicker of this story is how on their wedding day, this is set in a future society, and I was inspired by Chinese weddings because on their wedding day, both brides are wearing a very, very thick lace red veil, so they can't see worth a shit. There are two people who are supposed to be guiding the brides, but they accidentally get the brides mixed up. How the hell they did that, I guess I'll find out as I write it, and you will find out when you read it. But via the fact that happened, the brides end up marrying the wrong husband, causing both couples to be put in a bit of a situation, and as they try to untangle the situation, they learn these marriages they were forced into, there's something more nefarious going on attached to that, and they're going to have to figure that out, not just so they can later possibly get divorced, but also so that they can protect themselves. But I will get more into that as this story gets closer to being published. I'm actually very, very, very excited about this story. The whole ideas from it I think are pretty unique, and I will be telling you more about it as I continue to write. Alright, now these stories I am going to go over next are a couple of stories I've been working on, and I am either getting them done in 2026 or 2027 because I really, really, really want to move forward in their series, and I can't do that if it's not done. The first is Curse of the Frog Prince Part 3. Now, Curse of the Frog Prince Part 3 is the last entry in the frog stories in my Butterfly Tales series. It goes on the adventure of Princess Akenyi trying to free herself and her kingdom from a mad tyrant, and she has to work with this talking frog. Now, if you want to know more about that, Curse of the Frog Prince Parts 1 and 2 are currently out and available now, but the final entry in this whole frog fiasco before I start writing other fairy tale retellings in this series, it's in production, and I plan to either get it done this year or next year. Either way, I'm getting it done because this is a story I'm enjoying it, but I'm also ready to be done writing it. I don't think it's a bad story. It's just I've been working on it for a while and I've had some writer's block with it, and I am just ready to finish Curse of the Frog Prince Part 3. So I will be giving you more updates with this book as I go along. This is also a book I expected to have out last year. It also got put on hold because of the second entry in my Christmas Mafia series, True Love for Christmas. Now, if you know about True Love for Christmas, you know it's picking up from where my story Perilous Love for Christmas left off, with this whole poinsettia curse. Basically, this woman has to sleep with this man because she has this poinsettia mark, and if she doesn't sleep with him, he'll unalive. If she does sleep with him, then she'll unalive. If you want to know more about that, you need to read Perilous Love for Christmas, which is available now. Anyway, my lovelies, True Love for Christmas was supposed to be out last year, but when I was writing True Love for Christmas, I honestly did not foresee how big of a story True Love for Christmas is, because True Love for Christmas really, really gets deep into the world that the story takes place in. There are a lot of new characters, a lot of new things you'll discover, a lot of new things the characters discover, and it's just this really, really intense part of the story, and it has been, really fun to learn about everything and learn more about my characters, but this story does demand a lot, so I do not feel it will be ready until this coming December, which we got a minute before that, but I will be giving updates as it gets close to December, so you will be hearing more about True Love for Christmas, which will hopefully be published in 2026. There is one more story, my lovelies, that I forgot that I had tabled, I believe in 2023, and I have just really started to powerhouse through writing that as well, and that is part 2 to the Matrimony series, Honeymoon Phase. The first entry in the Matrimony series was Wedded Bliss, which is my vampire story. Well, my first vampire story that I have published, and Wedded Bliss is an interesting story. It's about a young woman fiance cheating on her. She decides to marry some handsome stranger, marries handsome stranger only to get involved with vampires by doing so. Yeah, you're definitely gonna want to read that story, especially since part 2 is in production. I am happy to a degree with the headway I made so far. Obviously, I'm still in early writing phase with it, so it's going to take a minute, but I am happy with the progress it's starting to make, and I do expect to have that story done by 2027. And there is one more story, my lovelies, I forgot about that I will talk about really, really quick, that is also in production and has been making some very nice headway, and that is my story, The Vampire's Doll. Now, The Vampire's Doll is an interesting story because the inspiration for all of that starts with a video game called Bad Dad. This crazy scientist guy who was a serial unaliver and ran experiments on people is trying to unalive his daughter because he wants to keep her preserved and he doesn't want her to be a serial unaliver like him. Yeah, interesting game. Well, I watched a Let's Play of it, and it ironically inspired The Vampire's Doll. The Vampire's Doll is not a story about a father trying to take out his daughter. It is a story about a woman who sadly suffered a miscarriage after being pushed off a staircase, and nobody believes she was pushed off the staircase. They all think she had a mental breakdown and jumped, and they refuse to really take her side with anything, especially her husband, who doesn't really like her. He's got a mistress in this whole secret family. Only reason why he got her pregnant was pressure from his own family and her family to do so. But this is not a match made in heaven, and she is not happy in her marriage. She's very alone because her family, for the most part, they use her more like a pawn. How they're doing that, I will elaborate more on as I get closer to publishing this story. Now, where the vampire comes in this story has to do also with her husband, because the family is in some financial trouble and her husband's trying to figure out how to figure that out. How do I get us out of this financial trouble? And he learns that this very powerful vampire is looking for a new place to live. And you know, that works for him. Not just because he was able to acquire a very nice castle to sell to said vampire, but also the town where they live is plagued by all kinds of monsters. And if you get a vampire in town, the vampire will unalive all the monsters for sports. So, you know, that's a double win. Unfortunately, when they get the vampire to their town, the vampire eventually starts paying a little too much attention to our female protagonist, and eventually he wants to turn her into a doll. Now, what I mean by that and how that's going to work, you will find out as the year goes by, and I will be giving little tidbits about this story. All right, my lovelies, that is the first section of our shareholders meeting with which books are in production, which books have gotten tabled, and which books I expect to either be published in 2026 or 2027. We will pick up more in what's going on in the second part of the shareholders meeting tomorrow. Until then, I hope you all have a lovely day.